force majeure, right? Because, COVID is still here and it still does have some impact as we move forward. We'll talk through the interconnection process between the simplified, the expedited, and the standard process, in addition to talking through some of the application review and screening steps. We got a section here on net metering and AOBC credit allocation, followed by the transfer of project ownership, a few slides around metering, and then we have a new National Grid solar inverter demonstration conversation to happen there at the end before we get to the question and answer session. So that's what we're looking at here for the agenda. So I will dive into the safety message and get things going. So just the spring safety reminders, right? Checking your smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, replacing the batteries, making sure everything's working well. Usually do that right around the time that the clocks change. But definitely a good thing to be reminded of and to remember. Checking fire extinguisher dates, needle indicators, right? Ensure that they're going to be working properly. Make sure you have those in the house if you don't already have one. Check cords, fraying, or visible wires, replace if needed to prevent electrical fires. Cleaning around your dryers and remove any built up lint from the ducts or the dampers to avoid fires. And then ladder safety is huge, right? As we all start to pile out of our house into the nicer weather and do work around our house or your yard work, right? Just make sure if you are using a ladder, you're using it properly. You're having someone else help you, and it's on level ground, right? You're not reaching over it, right? Climb down, move it, and make sure you get that 4-to-1 ratio, right? That for every 4 feet high, you should be kicked bottom by a foot. So those are some safety spring reminders here. Now, just jumping into the COVID force majeure, this has actually been unchanged for over a year now. National Grid declared sort of a blanket force majeure at the end of March of 2020, right? Just anticipating issues that COVID and the pandemic was going to end up causing. I'm happy to say that, for the majority of it, we were able to proceed as usual. We got a lot of projects progressed and interconnected in 2020, despite the pandemic, but with that, we did have a number of issues that were that had specific force majeure notices sent out. So I think what the point I want to make here is that the overall general force majeure hasn't changed, right? We're still monitoring on a daily basis, whether it's resource issues, whether it's procurement issues. We continue to monitor it. We continue to still see issues. Some of those issues can be mitigated and don't have impacts on projects. But then when we do see an impact directly to a project, a specific force majeure notice is sent to that project owner, making them aware of what we think the impact and the time frame impact is going to be. And we'll continue with those practices. So with that, we'll dive right into the simplified process. Just a reminder, right, to stay on mute, turn your cameras off, and the call has been started, the recording, and any questions can be sent through the Google form. With that, I'll hand it over to Margaret.
Great, thanks, Will. My name is Margaret Campbell. I am the supervisor for the Simplified Application Development team here at National Grid. And to start off today, we're going to review the criteria for simplified applications. So simplified applications have a total system size of 15 kW or less for single phase and 25 kW or less for 3-phase. And these system sizes are the total system size, including solar plus AC storage. In addition to qualify for the simplified process, the application must be UL 1741 SA listed, and the project must pass the simplified screening process. And next slide. So there's 4 steps to the simplified process. First, the application is submitted to National Grid. We're going to review that application, and so long as it's complete, we'll issue conditional approval to construct the system. After the system's constructed, the completion package, including the photos for the witness test, are submitted back to National Grid. We'll review that package, and if it's complete, order the meter. And then once the meter's set, we issue the authority to interconnect. And these are the timeframes for simplified. So when the application is first submitted, it does list 3 days to acknowledge OEC, but you actually get an automatic response from our portal. So just if you don't get that response, it's a good idea to just go back and double check it. You actually hit finalize submission. We're going to review that application within 10 days, and then you'll either get the conditional approval for construction, or you'll get a hold notification if there's some concerns that need to be addressed. And because this is simplified, we then get to skip a bunch of steps and go down to the completion package witness test. And so once that completion package with the certificate of completion and the photos for the witness test are submitted to National Grid, we're going to review that within 10 days and then order the meter. And once the meter is set, you'll get authority to interconnect. So in that process, we did want to take some time to look at areas where we commonly have holds or concerns. So hopefully these can be addressed before the application is submitted, so process runs smoother for everybody. On the application, we do ask that it matches the customer's account exactly, especially with MassSmart. MassSmart requires a copy of the customer's bill. So if you already have a copy of the bill there when you're filling out the application, if you copy it, what's on the bill onto the application, it just makes it smoother for everyone, can prevent that hold. And also, if there's any concerns the customer has on their bill, if there's any information on there that's not current, the customer would want to address that with our customer service department before submitting the application for solar, again, to help prevent any holds if anything wasn't current. And please do wait to construct the system until after conditional approval for construction is issued. In the first slide, we did mention the simplified screening process. And as we continue to see increased saturation, we do see simplified processes failing or not passing that simplified screening and do need to go to expedited. So you definitely would want to wait for that conditional approval, make sure you've made it through screening before you construct the system. So after conditional approval, all the forms for the completion package are going to become available in our portal. And one of those is the service upgrade form. We do recommend you complete this form before the rest of your completion documents, because once the service upgrade form is completed, you will receive a work request number. And that work request number should be given to the municipal inspector. And they'll call in that number to us after they've completed the inspection. So having that number available for them when they come out helps expedite the process. And we do recommend, please do review that was called in before submitting your completion package. And just to kind of help with verifying the inspector did call it in, the work request number and the status of that municipal inspection have been added to our portal. So we gave you a little screenshot here. When you're in the portal viewing a case, if you just click over to the related tab and scroll down a bit, you'll see the work request number, which again is helped out if you request it early and misplace it by the time the inspector comes out. It is available there for you. You can just find it on the portal. And also we have right next to it is that status. So you would want to see that in a completed status before you submit your completion documents to help prevent that hold. And my last slide for today is just some common questions and concerns we've seen about storage with simplified applications. So in the beginning, when we were talking about the size limits for the simplified process, we did mention that's AC storage plus solar. So if you have an example here is a 10 kW solar system, single phase plus a 7 kW of AC storage, that would be an expedited application because solar plus storage is over the 15 kW limit. Or solar plus AC storage is over the 15 kW limit. But when you're looking at the cap exempt for net metering, that's solar only. So this same example is 10 kW. So it would be cap exempt for net metering, but it would go through expedited because the solar plus AC storage is over the 15 kW limit for simplified. And just any DC storage, though, is not included in that system size. And in mass, storage with net metering that charges from the grid cannot export to the grid. So we want to make sure when we're reviewing your application that it meets this requirement. And in order to verify that, we do ask that you include a note on your one line indicating if the solar is going to charge from the grid and if it's going to export to the grid. So we're going to look for that. And we do see just some holds if that note is not available. And last note I had today is if you are planning on participating in Mass Smart, all generation does need to be captured by the smart meter. And this is, we see it coming up as a concern with systems with backup panels, just making sure the placement of the smart meter captures that generation before the load on that backup panel would use any of that generation. And that concludes my slides today on the simplified process. I'm going to turn it over to JJ now for screening.
Thank you, Margaret. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be covering some of the screening review processes and updates, as well as pre-apps and some of the applications requirements that we need when we get any of the cases. So pre-apps are now required for all cases that are 250 kW and larger per the MADPU 1955D. Some of the pre-app fees are $100 if they're 250 kW or less, $250 from 250 to 500 kW, and then anything over half a meg is $750. At the end of this, at the end of the slide deck, there's going to be a bunch of links. One of those is going to be the hosting capacity map links, and that'll just when you apply for a pre-app, that'll be something to look at, so you can see if you're going to apply for whatever system size, if the feeder will be able to handle it, and then you'll be able to know if you're going to have any additional challenges or anything with your application. In the pre-app, there's like a lot of information once the pre-application report is completed. It should include any kind of studies ongoing, any kind of interconnecting challenges. Please review the application completely, the pre-application report in its entirety. And towards the end of the pre-application report, there'll be an application review checklist that has everything required when proceeding and applying for interconnection. Some of the application review, not really changes, but updates. So we will not be providing transformers for any standalone interconnections of 300 kVA or larger. So if you have a 300 kVA system that you would like to put online, we can provide the transformer. Anything larger will require primary metering. And that also includes if it is a 300 kVA when primary metering is the least cost to serve option. Another note here is all commercial meters need to be grouped together. So when you are adding to an existing system, our metering department and a lot of the ESB would like the disconnection meters grouped together. And anytime you will be adding a new DG system that currently has pad mounted transformer metering, the metering will need to be relocated to a CT cabinet, either on the exterior of the building or in the metering room, wherever you're going to have all the meters grouped together. For applications, we do need service construction work request numbers on there. The billing account number, like Margaret mentioned, needs to match everything in the portal. If you're looking to derate any of your inverters, the curtailment letter needs to explain from the manufacturer that the inverter will be rated for whatever size you intend on derating it to. The anti-islanding documentation is only required for cases a 0.5 megawatt or larger, or if any interconnection application will need to go to further study. If it's on a challenging feeder, or if there's any kind of studies, we're going to request that anti-islanding document, as well as the low rejection over voltage letter. And then all expedited cases that need further study will need all documents required for standard projects. So on line diagrams, when I review them and where we're in screening, these are some of the most commonly either missing or not properly noted things. The interrupting device for the make, model, voltage, and current rating, that is the customer's interrupting device that they will provide for the system. So that needs to have all that information on there. Same for the relaying. All the relaying also needs the make, model, voltage, and current ratings on there. The core structure and interfacing transformer, this also goes for a customer-owned equipment. We need to know if it's a YY transformer, Delta Y, and all that matters for when it goes to further study for all the grounding requirements, total rating. All one lines need to be EEPE stamped. They have to be an electrical engineer stamped print. We've been getting some drawings with civil stamps and other stamps, but the actual requisite is an electrical engineering professional engineer stamp. The voltage transformer and current transformer configurations for the relaying mostly, and then the ratio and impedance of any grounding transformer that will be added to the system. For site plans, a lot of people submit Google Map screenshots, which is perfectly fine as long as it encompasses everything that's at the end of the pre-app application form with the checklist that includes property lines, any kind of easement issues, transformer locations. You need to state the point of common coupling as well as the point of demarcation is another word for the same term where the utility and the customer equipment will meet. The company pole number nearest to the proposed PCC. Any meters on site, existing, proposed, customer-owned, utility-owned, they all have to be on the plan. And then we will need to note that all meters need to be grouped together, as well as that there's going to be 20 feet of clearance and access on site. So that is all I have for screening updates. I'm going to turn this over to Mike Armel for the expedited review process.
Hi, it's Mike Armel. I'm on the expedited team. I'm a specialist, and I will handle all the projects that go through their initial screens, and it's determined that they will follow the expedited path. Following up on what Margaret had covered on simples, we will handle listed single-phase inverters with systems with power ratings greater than 15 kW on the single phase. And on a three-phase, it would be greater than 25 kW on the radial feed. So they will go directly into expedited. Any projects that didn't pass the simplified process screens, they'll go to expedited, and as well as the non-simplified projects that do not require an impact study. The maximum size supplemental review is based on the review of screens. Thank you. Okay. As far as the process, so as JJ alluded to, on pre-applications, they are required on the systems that are greater than 250 kW. Sizes smaller or upon completion of the pre-app would go through the an application status with the job owner. At that point, we're reviewing all the documents that have been received. And then once everything's been completed, everything on the application agrees with what we have in the current account, et cetera, we would then pass it on to what we would call screening, which is where it's getting an engineering review. And if need be, we would also get a supplemental review. Upon completion of either the screen or or supplemental review, we would issue conditional approval to construct the system. If any national grid construction is required, we would go through the process of getting easements and building that and collecting any payments that are required to complete that. The witness test process, typically for our expedited cases, is handled with a commissioning memo with the as-built as far as the completion forms. So when we review all of the completion documents, and everything, and inspections are called in. We then call for a meter set. Upon the meter set and the asset registration, we then email out the authorization to interconnect. For the review path, similar to what Margaret said, on these cases, you will get that automatic email acknowledging receipt. It's listed as 3 days, but you will get that upon the application. Reviewing the application is a 10-day period. Within that 10 days, you will receive it's going to screening, or there was something deficient, and we will put it on hold and ask for to have that remedied. The screening process, the 25 business day process, it would go there if any screens are not passed. If the company may require a supplemental review before providing an interconnection service agreement. So typically that would be if there is any site work construction that's needed to interconnect the project. The key threshold for the screens aggregate generation is less than 67% of the minimum load on the feeder. Other screens review voltage quality, reliability, and safety to reduce the potential need for impact studies. The relay control system must be well defined to make supplemental review easy. So following the screening, it may go to supplemental review if required. That would be an additional 20 days. So when these two parallel processes are completed, at that point, job owner, someone such as me, has the 10 business days, and we then draft the ISA to deliver to the customer. So the total process for these projects is either 45 days without supplemental review or 65 days with. The construction schedule will be spelled out on the ISA, towards the end of it, whether the weeks involved and the various, depending on primary metering, et cetera, and kind of a varied timeline, because obviously all the projects are different. Again, with the witness test, that's within 10 days of receiving the COC. With these expedited cases, we will handle that. With the completion documents, we will take that commissioning memo, review that, make sure that the tables are good, and then we will order the meter set. Common errors in completion documents. For most expedited applications, the commissioning memo needs to be on company letterhead. Again, this is provided in lieu of the witness test. So sometimes we do get that, and it has no letterhead on it, and signatures and dates are missing or do not agree with the one line. So I will speak to that on the as-built as well. The commissioning test should consist of the following: a 2-second shutdown when disconnect is open test, as well as the 5 minutes before restart when the disconnect is closed test. We confirm the system matches the as-built, include the most recent version, and again, date as built provided. List the inverter relay frequency and the trip time settings. So that commissioning memo, we want to have all of that contained, and again, most current version. Right. The as-built. It must be PE stamped, signed and dated by the person that performed the commissioning test. Signatures and dates should match. For photos, the meter picture should show the permanent plaque visible at eye level that includes a warning about the generator installed. We also will require photos for the AC utility disconnect. If it's not grouped adjacent to the utility revenue meter, we do need a permanent plaque visible eye level that clearly identifies the location of the AC utility disconnect. Again, this is also for first responders as well as National Grid. If it's not right there, we need to know very quickly where it is located. In Massachusetts, for projects greater than 60 kW, we do require evidence of insurance. You can refer to the ISA or to the tariff for the requirements. One of the things that we do see sometimes with projects that are around for a bit, sometimes the COI is expired. We don't have the most recent version of it. So that's something when we're going through the completion process, just to make sure that you have the most recent paperwork from the insurer. For qualified facilities, we will be looking for the Schedule A P rate, W-9, ACH form. And at this point, we're asking for supplier enrollment form for projects greater than 60 kW. However, we going forward, we probably will not be collecting that. However, right at this point, we still are doing that. So projects greater than 60 kW in mass do require interval metering, a wireless system, or a phone line, a dedicated phone line. The company requires a 4G wireless signal test on a Verizon network in order to provide wireless metering. So we have a form, has a screenshot, and you then provide that as part of the test, and you can see where that we have a good range at this location. The phone lines, if you cannot have a wireless system, the phone lines must be dedicated and terminated at the meter location. The line must be 100% copper. Fiber lines will not communicate properly. These meters are long lead time items, and prep time can be 6 to 8 weeks. So it's important to work through this with the job owner well in advance of when you intend to seek the authority to interconnect. There's a link here for the wireless test form, which will be within the case. At that point, you can upload your screenshot and complete the form for us to have the meter programmed. Standard process will be with Jen Kim.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Jennifer Kim, and I'm one of the study account managers, and I'll be going through the standard review process. So essentially what projects apply to the standard criteria would be any projects that require a distribution system impact study. So pretty much majority would be large scale DG projects if it is greater than 500 kilowatts, but it could also be project specific where smaller projects could fit into here. Any DG projects that would require system modifications at the substation level, any non-listed inverters or generators other than PV, so induction, synchronous, asynchronous motors, most CHP systems, and pretty much anything else that doesn't qualify for the simplified or expedited process. And so the interconnection process steps are you would first submit a pre-application, then you go into the application, which once in the screening process will determine that it is going to be needing to go down the standard process. And so at that point, we would have the engineering review, which would be an impact study. A detailed study could be required if it's a complex enough system. And then at that point, we would have the conditional approval, which would be the ISA to have the agreement to construct the DG system. And once that is done, then we get the payment and design starts, and then we have the company construction. Once everything is done, we can have the witness test, install the meter, register the assets, and give ATI. And so this outlines a little bit of the various timeframes, which similarly with the application receipt, we would typically have it be immediately rather than the 3 business days. And then reviewing application also takes 10 days. And then we would do the initial review, which would be the screening memo in 20 days. And at that point, the impact study would be determined to be required, and the agreement would be sent out, and the customer would be required to pay and sign the agreement. And the timeline for the impact study typically is around 55 to 60 business days. It could change depending on the complexity, which we can talk a little bit further in the later slides. And throughout the impact study, it could be determined that a detailed study is required. At that point, it could range from 30 to 60 business days, or also by mutual agreement, depending on complexity. But once all the studies are done, we would send the executable ISA, which would be in 15 business days. So the total days can vary, but typically is around 135 or 160, could go to 200 depending on this for the standard complex process. And then the construction schedule is also varied depending on what needs to get done based on the result of the impact study. And it would be outlined in your ISA. And then the witness test is similarly to other projects, it's 10 days from the company's approval of the witness test procedures or by mutual agreement. And just as a clarification, because this was a more recent order by the DPU back in September of last year that first kayak payment is now due within 60 business days rather than the 120 that was before, as well as kayak payments will no longer have the 30 business day cure period. So this would be applicable for any new ISAs or amendments going forward. And just some key points about the standard review path. As mentioned before, impact study and detail studies, if applicable, will be done to just determine the impact on our system, the required modifications, and the associated cost. If the project is greater than 1 megawatt but less than 5 megawatts, it would need a PP 5-1. And if it's greater than 5 megawatts, it would need a PPA along with the transmission system impact study. And so this would be submitted typically at the 20 business day review mark of the impact study timeline and would put the impact study on an ASO hold until ISO New England provides the approval or the ASO study, if required, is complete. And so moving along, if the system substation modifications are required, then the company does have 60 business days for the study, as well as if estimated construction costs are greater than $1 million, study timeline would be by mutual agreement. And for this item, it would be identified as well at the 20 business day review mark if this would be applicable for the study. And then once all the studies are done, again, ISA is provided. If detailed study is required, then the customer may request an early ISA at the conclusion of the impact study, rather than waiting for the conclusion of the detailed study. Another reminder that per the DPU order, that first kayak payment is now due within 60 business days, as well as we no longer have the cure period. And that design determines the details of the system modifications prior to moving into construction. So oftentimes there could be questions regarding placement of certain poles and equipment that we would not be able to get answers to until we get into the design. So until we get the customer's first payment. And then easements, permitting, and right-of-way are required to move into construction and are typically determined around the conclusion or throughout the process of design. And depending on if there are third-party issues or regarding these easements and permitting and right-of-way, it could result in restudy or redesign if the third parties do not agree with what was proposed. So a reminder about witness testing. The checklist was updated back in May of last year. If you haven't taken a look at it since then, just please make sure you check it out at the link provided. The key points of what had been changed is that pictures are now required, showing the generators, transformers, grounding equipment, and the PCC, which would include the nameplates for the equipment as well, not just the equipment itself. And these engineering documents can be provided in advance, but please do note that all documents must be provided before engineering review can begin. And all checklist requirements must be approved, and as well as National Grid and the developer's construction must be completed before we can actually schedule the witness test. And then if you have any questions regarding the witness test, definitely feel free to reach out to your assigned account manager for the project. And then regarding ATI, this I believe was mentioned in the last webinar, but also just another reminder that the asset registration is required as part of compliance documents before we can give ATI. This has been updated on our compliance document checklist, which is also available on the website. Just as context, National Grid applies for asset registration on behalf of the interconnecting customers. And all incentive projects, so qualifying facility net metering that are greater than 60 kilowatts do require asset registrations with ISO before ATI is granted. And this is because we can't backdate the payments. So just to align that we have the approval and all the assets registered before we give ATI. And this asset registration typically takes 5 to 10 business days. if your project is behind the meter class 2 or 3 net metering and demand response systems, they are exempt from being registered as a settlement only generator. So those are SOGs. And then AC coupled battery standalone would need to be registered separately with ISO if you are intending to generate power to the grid. All right, and I'll pass it off to Vishal for the next section.
Thanks, Jennifer. This is Vishal. I'll be covering best practices around net metering credits and AOBC credits in this section. Recently, the company has observed large accumulation of the credits on the host accounts as well as the recipients accounts. And the reason behind this large accumulation, there could be several reasons. We think below are some of the actions that you can take to make sure it doesn't happen again. So one of the observations that we saw that and that you should also make sure, in some cases, customers or your recipients could have a different supplier. In that case, that supplier might be charging the customer directly and not through National Grid. So that supply portion of the bill is not being paid off through these credits. So it's very important for you to work with your recipients and host customer to make sure you combine the supply portion of the bill with the National Grid's delivery portion and have one single bill generated through National Grid so you can take the most benefit of your credits that are being transferred. The second one, when you're submitting your Schedule Z or allocation sheets, make sure you are including the active electric accounts within our service territory. We have noticed many times that some of these accounts are finalized or they're not accurate, and that results in additional credits being accumulating on the host customer itself. The third observation, in some cases, it may take us 1 to 2 weeks to transfer the credits to recipients. Your recipient account might be on an auto pay, where as soon as bill is generated, their bill is paid. Just make sure you work with your recipient and either disable the auto pay or choose a different date, giving that window of time for credits being transferred from host to recipient. If you don't do that, obviously your bill will be paid and then the credits will hit the account, and that will also result in the accumulation of these credits. And the last bullet, many recipients go through energy efficiency measures to reduce their consumption. Just stay in touch with your recipients to make sure you're fully aware of those measures, and you modify your allocation percentage so that way you're not over allocating the credits to that particular recipient. So these are kind of the key observation. The last one, and which is the most important one, we're not close to how you are actually allocating the credits and determining which recipient should get what percent of the allocation. It's very important that you do it on a dollar basis or on the bill value basis and not the actual kWh. There are many reasons to that. If your recipient have a different supplier, the supply charge per kWh might be different than what the host is actually generating. They might have they might be on a different rate than actually your host. So it's not actually 1-to-1 ratio when it comes to kWh. So you really want to allocate your credits using the dollar bill and not the actual usage or the consumption. So these are kind of the best practices. We can move on to the next slide. this slide particularly talks about the process of submitting your changes to your Schedule Z. Your initial submission, make sure you submit your allocation sheet for our review in advance. Historically, we have seen the customers submitting this very late in the process. We want to make sure we get at least 60 days before we issue you that authority interconnection letter. This will give us enough time to review and approve your Schedule Z, make sure you're complying with all the requirements. The important one is when it comes to net metering, you can only allocate within the same load zone and to an active electric account. So just make sure you're complying with that requirement. Any subsequent change request, we have deployed a post-connection portal or post-connection intake process. There's a link at the bottom of this slide, which you can visit to get into the details of the process and how to submit. We definitely encourage using our portal to submit your request and not submit through emails. It's a more efficient way for us to receive your request, review it, and process it on a timely manner. Based on the volume, it may take us 1 to 2 billing cycle to process your subsequent changes. We have definitely seen an uptick in subsequent change request. And it might be because of the volume and number of projects we already have connected. In addition to your twice-a-year change that you can make to your Schedule Z, we are also allowing the customers to swap a final account. Let's say you have an off-taker whose account is finaled, or the TNAN moved to a different house. We can process that request just to swap that particular final account. It will not be counted towards your twice-a-year change. We can't accept other changes to your location. The swap request will simply be a one-to-one swap of that final account. The last one is the banked credits. Any unallocated credit, it will remain on the host account. And a company has been allowing to process a one-time transfer of those accumulated credits to the other off-takers who can truly consume those credits. Obviously, we don't want to transfer, or we don't want to process a request which is transferring the credits to the other accounts where there's already a large accumulation. You can submit this one-time transfer request again through our portal. There's a specific form on our website that you can use. Also, company does not refund any banked credits. These credits are truly, need to be used to pay your electric bill, and they cannot be cashed out. Can we go to the next slide? On this slide, I want to talk a little bit about the smart payment timeline and allocation of the AOBC credits. We are getting increased number of phone calls in our control center. So I want to take this time to kind of walk you through what the process looks like in order to receive the smart payment. As you all know, there are two different categories: projects below 25 kW and projects above 25 kW. So projects below 25 kW, once the smart meter is installed and you receive your authorization to interconnect email, you take that email and then you submit that to third-party administrator, which is Clear Result, to receive a final SOQ or final statement of qualification. It may take some time for Clear Result to review all your paperwork and then issue you that final SOQ because it has to be also reviewed by DOER. But once that final SOQ is issue, which could take, a month, 2 months, or, we have seen in some cases up to 6 months, and it all depends on the volume of request the third-party administrator is getting. But for projects below 25 kW, we have agreed to backdate the smart payment to the original date when the smart meter was installed. And that's the effective date that you see on your final SOQ. So if there are number of bills that we need to cancel and rebill, it takes time on our end. It could take a 1 billing cycle or 2 billing cycle, and it all depends on the volume. So by the time your system is connected, it's generating, and you get your smart payment, it could be months. And it's very important to understand there are multiple players involved here to review and process before you can get your smart payment. So just be aware that once you get your authorization, it could be 3, 4, or 5 months before you see your smart payment. Your smart payment will be issued going back to when your system was connected. So we are backdating your bill. For projects over 25 kW, which are more complex from billing perspective, there are multiple flavors, as you know. It's very complicated for us to cancel and rebill. So we are not going to backdate any bills. Similar to projects below 25 kW, when you do submit your ATI email or the meter installation email to Clear Result for their review, once they review it, we are in constant contact with them internally to make sure they include or add an effective date on that final SOQ, which is going to be the next billing cycle date whenever they contact us. So that's what you will see. So obviously there will be a time in between you getting your ATI and receiving a smart payment or receiving a final SOQ. During that time, your system is actually set up as a qualifying facility, and you're getting those QF payments. Obviously, you're not losing any money. Your 10-year term or the 20-year term begins with the effective date on the final SOQ, and that's when you start seeing your smart payments. Moving on to the AOBC credits, your initial submission has to be to Clear Result. They are the one responsible to review your initial allocation sheet for AOBC. They also had to make sure that you're complying with all the community shared solar or other adders. So that's why they are the one who are reviewing it. We are also confirming with them that the allocation is accurate. The subsequent change, similar to Schedule Z, use our portal to submit your request. The process is well defined. There's a link at the bottom of this slide, which will kind of walk you through in the detail what that process looks like. We are also allowing customers to remove an off-taker. Let's say you have a recipient customer who doesn't want to be part of the community solar program or community DG that as part of your project, and they want to be removed. We can also process that request. That request will not also be counted as part of that 2-year threshold, two limit per year threshold. There's a separate form to submit an account removal request. The bank AOBC credits, they are usually cashed out after March 31st at an avoided cost. So there's no other alternate options. So it's very important that before March 31st, you make sure you are using up all of your credits before we process your cash out. Next slide. Credit allocation transfer history request. This is another type of request that we're recently have been getting more and more in our queue. We understand that the community solar stakeholders, they want to have more data, more information, how much credits are getting transferred to what account, when they're applied so that they can bill that particular recipient. We do have a process set up right now where you can submit a credit transfer history through our portal. It's a manual process on our end. So obviously based on the volume, our response time is going to vary. The data will include the credit transfer history from host to satellite only. We're trying not to add more manual burden. So whatever information is available right now, we'll simply provide it to you. As some of you may already know, we are having ongoing conversations with the community solar stakeholders and DPU to finalize the data fields that you all want. So you can also join those conversations if you haven't already. We have just a quick update on that. We did submit our request of the data fields that we will be able to provide. We still have yet to discuss the process and certification requirements to make sure the data is protected, and we want to make sure we are not breaching any privacy concerns. In the future, we are looking at a long-term solution or somewhat an automated solution where you will be able to access this information online. Some of you are already involved in the pilot where we are seeking active feedback from you, what type of data you want, in what format you want. So that online application is also coming where you will be able to access all this information. Obviously, this is all subject to the data sharing privacy concerns that we have, and those will need to be implemented before we grant access to that data through this online application. And this last slide, this is our post-interconnection knowledge page. We launched this page on our portal late December. You will find all sorts of information on this page, who to contact if you have post-interconnection issue or inquiry that you need to talk to. We also have added additional resources to support this area. As we're connecting more and more projects, we're finding that there are more issues and more concerns that you all have, and we want to make sure this area is also supported. That's the last slide I had. I will turn it over to now Andrea to talk about transfer of ownership.
Thank you, Vishal. All right, for this slide, what we mostly wanted to highlight is that when projects are being bought and sold, or LLCs are being bought and sold, that there are different forms that are necessary depending on what kind of buying and selling is going on. For the different parts of the process, whether or not there's an ISA is really the change. Here we have ATI, it's really ISA, I apologize, that the forms sort of change what you're going to need. So pre-ATI and pre-ISA, and really these are true always, make sure your job owner knows that you're selling it. I've had multiple instances where someone has reached out to me and said, hey, I sold this months ago, and the new job owner never let me know. The old customer had never let us know. And then we're trying to figure out, where we actually are in terms of the construction process for large projects. The ISA will need to be updated in almost all instances, if not to name the LLC specifically, if it's already there, say you're just bought and sold an LLC, to update what is section 17 within the ISA for the contact person, because that name and that contact will be used, especially post ATI, where if we're trying to get hold of someone for an outage, right? That information is very valuable to us, very valuable to you. We want to make sure it's correct. If you're selling a LLC, you do not need our consent to do that, but you do need to inform us. If you are selling the ISA and it is going from one entity to another, then there's a consent form. So as you can see at the bottom of the slide is a screenshot from our interconnection documentation page. And these are labeled exactly as they're going to be needed, whether it's an assignment pre or post the ISA, whether you have an ISA in hand, and an assignment for an affiliate if you are, say, assigning it to yourself within your own company of an ISA to an LLC that is fully held as a subsidiary of the main customer. In all cases, right, the big thing is that you let us know, that you let your job owner know. And if you're not sure which one you're supposed to be looking at, which one you're supposed to be using, they can help you. All of these were updated at the end of 2020. So if you have an old version of this, make sure you update and use the one that's here. The sales between customers, your documentation is good to have, but we do need these forms explicitly and expect to need a legal info doc as well as part of all of this. Next slide. So for projects that are already interconnected, so these, whether they're the residential simple applications or the large ones, if you're handing them off to, say, an operator instead of the developer, we are going to go through that post ATI portal that Vishal mentioned earlier. That is the preferred manner as you go through the portal itself. You can call the numbers that are listed here. The documentations that are needed are what you might expect, right? The notice of assignment, payment credit transfer, the W-9, the ACH. For simple and residential applications, right, where these are homeowners, right, this is a process that, that's why they don't have to find the case in the portal. We just have that post ATI portal for them, and it goes to a team who is processing those. For the complex projects, make sure that we have everything we need. The main one being here is that host customer, a revised Schedule Z if it is a net metered project, and again, that legal information document will probably also be necessary. In spite of a lot of that information being other places, we're going to want it in that format so that it is easily found. There is, again, just a reminder that we have this post interconnection part of the portal. The link is here, right, and we've shown it before. That is where we really want to drive everyone who's working on something that they're either retrofitting an old project or need to update their information. That is the portal we want you to use, whether or not you have access to the original case. Handing this off to Laura for metering.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura McLaughlin. I am the supervisor in Mass Complex for the post ISA team. So my account managers will pick up the complex or standard process projects that have assigned ISA and the first payment has been made. The account managers will then take the project through design, permitting, construction, witness testing, metering, and I think everybody's favorite part, ATI. So just wanted to take a little bit of time here today to talk about metering, some key points, a little bit of insight into the process. I think we could probably spend 2 hours on metering alone. So this is sort of just a condensed version of metering. So just to start out, so why is metering essential to get right? And metering really is the way it is, so we can correctly capture the net generation at a site. So this means that we need to be able to distinguish between the load or the consumption on the site and the generation from the DER. So from either solar or battery or both. And we need to make this distinction so that we can either charge or pay the customers correctly. So just at a very, very high level, a customer is being paid for the generation minus the load, and that's equaling the energy sent to the grid. So you may either have a credit there or a balance. So just talking about metering at National Grid. So we are a very large utility. We handle both electric and gas. So we do set meters for all different types of projects, not just DG, unfortunately. So we have residential customers, we have commercial, we also have gas meters. So there's a lot of different metering at National Grid. There's a lot of different groups and departments. So sometimes I think, folks are frustrated with how long it may take. But just understanding that, National Grid is a large utility and we do handle metering for more than just DG. So if we talk about the type of metering equipment, it really depends on the size of the facility, what you're trying to do at the site. If you are going to export power or not, depending on the incentive, sometimes those drive different metering configurations. So it really depends on your specific project. So I think, as Mike had mentioned, any projects greater than 60 kilowatts in mass do require an interval meter. So this can either be a wireless meter, or you would need to install a phone line if you were not able to use the wireless option. So for standard or complex projects that we refer to them, this is a multi-month process to get the metering, and it does start in the construction phase of the process. So this is not, for the simple or a lot of the expedited, it can be a much quicker process. But for standard or complex projects, this can be a multi-month process. So it's typically an 8 to 12 week lead time. It does involve multiple departments that need to be engaged. And your account manager will send a notification to our internal metering teams. It lets them know, yep, we're ready to begin, getting the meter, programming it, testing it, getting it ready for your specific project. These are not, for these type of projects, these are not I would refer to them as our bread and butter meters. These are very specific. They need to be, programmed and tested and made ready for your project. So what do we need from you? In order to set the meter, there are a couple of things that we do need to have ready. So one thing, first and foremost, the municipal inspection has to be cleared. So you may hear this referred to as the 625 or the Muni requirement, but we do need that to be called in by the wire inspector and cleared. The meter needs to be paid for in full, and depending on the size of your projects, the payments would vary. The witness test, it would need to be complete and results would need to be approved. Again, this is for standard and complex projects. So as Mike had mentioned, expedited projects, they may not actually require the witness test, but they may just require the commissioning memo on the company letterhead. So again, depending on the path of your project, it would dictate the need for a witness test. Completion docs would need to be submitted and approved. The wireless signal test form needs to be complete and approved. Again, if you are not able to use the wireless meter option, we would require a dedicated phone line to be installed. If the phone line is going to be used, that's perfectly fine. It does need to be 100% copper line. The fiber lines do not communicate properly, so it would need to be the copper line. And just to mention one other thing, the meter socket or sockets need to be labeled properly in order to ensure that we're putting the right meter in the right location. So once the meter is installed, now what happens? So if you've gone through this process, you might be familiar with it, but others who have not. So the first thing that happens is National Grid has to ensure that we can actually communicate with the meter. So whether it is wireless or whether it is a hardline meter, we have to make sure that we can actually communicate with it. If there's no communication, that's going to really be an issue for both National Grid and for the customers as well. So we can't accurately bill or credit the account if we cannot talk to the meter. So once the meter's installed, we can actually confirm that we can communicate with the meter. The meter is then commissioned and the account is set up properly. So we have communication with the meter. Your account is properly coded and ready to go. Then we would actually take the information and register the asset, as Jennifer Kim was talking about in the earlier slide. So the asset is registered with ISO on behalf of the customer by National Grid. Again, this is for not every project. There are variations to this, but the standard or complex ones would need to be registered. It takes about 5 to 10 business days. And then once we do have asset registration, we would be able to issue the authority to interconnect, or ATI. So just taking a closer look at one of the forms that I had alluded to, the wireless signal test form. Again, this is used when you are going to be using a wireless meter. So it just demonstrates that there is sufficient wireless signal on site to actually install the wireless meter. If there is not significant signal, then you would need to either work with your job owner. Sometimes we can do an antenna option, but it's probably going to be a telephone line or a POTS line, plain old telephone service, and that would need to be installed. So we would need this wireless signal test form to be submitted prior to the meter being installed. It needs to demonstrate signal strength of 3 bars or more. It has to be performed using 4G LTE signal band with the Verizon carrier. And it must actually be performed in the location that the meter is going to be installed. So if you are standing on the roadway and you're getting a great signal, but that's not where the meter is going to actually physically be, you actually need to go to that location and take the test from that location. The signal can vary from one spot to another, so we want to just be sure that we have the signal from where the meter is going to be installed. And this is just an example, so hard to read on the screen, but this is what the directions for the test look like. It gives you an overview, exactly what you need to do, gives you a screenshot of what your phone should look like when you're taking the test. And then just next slide. So this is what we would need filled out. So it would need to be the testing company letterhead at the top. It has the facility information, the test results. So you would need to ensure that you had 3 bars or more. It needs to be the 4G LTE Verizon carrier. And then you would need the signature and date, as well as the picture from the site showing where the meter is going to be installed. So just a little bit of insight into that process and that document. Again, not applicable for all projects, but this is if you're going with the wireless meter option, this would need to be filled out and sent in. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul for the next section.
Thanks, Laura. Next slide, please. National Grid is starting a demonstration project for customer-owned solar inverters. In this demonstration project, customers will earn $25 for enrolling their inverter and $20 per year for staying in the program. Now, this is just a demonstration for this year, so that $20 per year part will come into effect next year if this continues on. For customers that opt into the demonstration, National Grid will adjust settings on their solar inverters to optimize system voltages that can improve power quality both at that customer's facility and on the grid. More efficient management of voltage by increasing is important because we're getting more and more solar on the grid. So this is our first step in doing this in customer-owned solar inverters. Participation is voluntary. It will not affect the interconnection process in any way or your interconnection service agreement. These setting changes do not change the solar generation, so will not affect any income from SMART or SREX or any other program. If you have any questions, please follow the link on the screen. Thanks.
Okay, so Will Kern, again, jumping in here for the questions. So I appreciate all the presenters rolling through that. And then we actually do have a number of questions that are come in. So we will start working through those. And we'll work across those for the next 15 to 20 minutes. So I will get started. We saw a couple of questions that came into the chat. We tried to answer a few of those on the fly. We grabbed the rest and we'll talk about those now. So JJ, I'm going to put you up here. I'll give you a chance to get off mute while I read the question, but I think you get a couple of them here.
Sure.
It says, is a SLD required for pre-application?
No. The three things that are required for pre-apps, in addition to the site plan attachment that needs to be uploaded to the portal, is the location. The location details need to be in there to make sure that whatever pre-application report information I'm pulling up directly relates to the area where the proposed interconnection is going to go. The capacity details for the system, so like the exact system size, and then the configuration details for the inverter, whether it's 3-phase, single phase, if it's going to have storage, DC coupled, AC coupled. That's all you need for a pre-app. Single line diagrams are required for application processes after the pre-app report has been issued.
Great, thank you. This next one's for you also, I believe. It says National Grid has noted 20 feet of clearance and access on site when reviewing the common issues for the site plan. What do you mean by this? 20 feet around equipment, 20-foot wide access road, please specify.
Yes, so it is a 20-foot wide access road that's required. The spacing around equipment will still be dictated by the ESB 750 and the ESB 759 A and B for all equipment clearances. Example, a pad mount transformer needs 10 feet of clearances on all sides. Unless it's a non-combustible material, then you can change the 10 feet down to 5 feet. All of those requirements and clearances will stay the same. The 20 feet of clearance is just the access road to enter the site and access equipment. So I apologize for not elaborating on that earlier.
Great, thank you. So the next one I'll take. This question, it says, it's understood why National Grid puts an impact study on hold at the 20 business day mark if the project needs a transmission study, as we're trying to prevent the need for a restudy. Would National Grid consider continuing the distribution impact study while a transmission study is occurring if the developer is willing to accept the risk and there could be a restudy or additional fee? So we've answered this question a few times, just in the sense that National Grid's uncomfortable and apprehensive about moving forward with a distribution study while a transmission study is being conducted. I think our stance on this is that we're going to take each case by case and make a decision. Right. I do think that there are areas of the state, transmission lines in the state that we do expect to have impacts on, right, that may require the need for some level of system modification. We have identified in the past distribution solution to transmission issues, those things that would need to be taken into account that would have an impact. So what we have seen in the past is an impact to the distribution solution based on a transmission study. But we would be willing to, on a case-by-case basis, have a discussion whether the progression of the distribution impact study in parallel with the transmission study makes sense. And then there would obviously be, a clear understanding from the project owner of what those potential risks are, as those studies are progressing in parallel. But feel free to ask the question, ask your job owner, right, to have that conversation. Something that we are very willing to discuss internally and with the project owner, what makes the most sense in that situation. So the next one, Vishal, I may lean on you a little bit here, but the next question I'm not quite sure is directed appropriately at National Grid, but it does say, for customers that already have an approved Schedule Z, why is Clear Results subsequently taking time to review the Schedule Z? Is this redundant? right, is this resulted in slower smart claim processing?
Yeah, I think there are several adders that you're applying for at the clear result. So in order to make sure you're eligible for those adders, they had to review the Schedule Z. Recently, we've been working with them behind the scene, and recently they have published some of a list of common errors, or kind of the keys to submit a complete application. So you don't have to, your application is not delayed. So I will definitely encourage you all to visit MA Smart Solar website and check that document.
Great, thank you, Vishal. All right, Mike Picaro, we're gonna have this next one, I think, is coming your way. So it says, by default, National Grid will not generally install a single phase transformer that is larger than 50 kVA, even though it is possible to buy larger single phase transformers. This is primarily due to phase imbalance concerns. There are methods for addressing potential phase imbalance. Is it possible to design a solution that allows for a single phase system that is larger than 60 kW? And would the study required to determine the cost-effective solution be lengthy and the upgrade expensive?
Right. Yeah, thanks, Will. So for this one, we do have standard sized equipment that we have to adhere to. So just like any company of our sort, we have standard sized equipment and conductors and whatnot that go out on the line. So we got to make sure we align with those in terms of what we can install out there. And in terms of the phase imbalance issue, we are, and we always do, evaluate any design proposals that the customer may have for their particular site, if they have a way of mitigating that. And anything that we have available as a standard offering on our system that could alleviate any kind of power quality type issues, phase imbalance, or whatever it may be, we would offer those as a solution. But those would have to come from some sort of a study. So at the very least, it would be putting the project through the expedited process, potentially even through a system impact study. And then coming out of those, we would identify what we have available as a solution for that would maintain the safety and reliability on our lines. So it's not that it can't be installed. It's just that we would need to talk through the specific solution sets. It's obviously very dependent on the design of the customer site itself, other surrounding facilities that may be on that feeder, and just the electrical conditions or characteristics of that feeder that you're trying to connect into. So it's very site dependent.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So I'm going to take the next couple here. So this one is, how many applications greater than or equal to 500 kW AC are in queue for ISA before Smart Block 9 is filled? And where can I look for this information? So there's a couple of pieces to this overall, right? The first one is that National Grid does not own and maintain the smart queue. So we don't have impact on the smart queue, and we don't have, at least CEI doesn't have visibility of where those stand. We do provide information on a monthly basis to the DOER, who then posts on their website the list of pending and interconnected projects. So that would be one spot where you would be able to go to see what projects are pending, right? And I think there is some data about how they're progressing through the process. Again, National Grid is, or the tariff has some binding confidentiality aspects of these projects, so National Grid errs on the side of caution and doesn't share project status information, except right through this DOER process and with some very specific information provided. So that would be one self-serve opportunity. But again, National Grid would not be providing a list of projects and their potential for smart queuing. The next one, I think, is going to be a little bit more of a takeaway for us, but it does say, I would appreciate if someone from National Grid would allow a screen share focus group for a day in the life of an interconnection application to walk through the portal user experience. So I know the portal's been live here for about 3 years. Right, there are a lot of specific user training that happened back when the portal was going live. I think what we can do is take away internally and figure out if a refresh of something like that is needed. But at the same time, there are a lot of job aids in the portal itself to help users. But that is something that we will take away and discuss internally. On whether that's something that, again, would need a refresh. Margaret, I'm going to line this one up for you. It says, what would the process be for installing a 10 kW DC solar system with battery backup that uses, say, 2 inverters that equal 12 kW AC capacity, shared between the battery and the solar? Still looking to qualify for standard residential net metering, but not applying connected solution battery backup incentive.
Thanks, Will. If I'm interpreting this question correctly, it sounds like it would be a 12 kW system using DC storage. So the limit for net metering, the cap exempt limit for net metering is 10 kW, and that's based on the nameplate rating kWac. So unfortunately, in this situation, they would not qualify for net metering because their nameplate rating is 12 kWac. But if I misunderstood the question and this part of this storage is AC coupled, that could change the answer because the limit for cap exempt net metering is based on the solar only. Well, inverters for solar only. So if it's shared, that is included. But if this inverter were just to have storage, that would not be included in the limit for cap exempt net metering.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mike, I got a couple lined up here for you. So it says on slide 15, National Grid indicated that it would not provide a transformer larger than 300 kVA, or when primary metering is the least cost to serve option. How is the least cost to serve analysis conducted? And then also, who owns the primary metering cluster? Can that be customer owned?
Yeah, thanks, Will. So for the primary metering cluster, that is owned and maintained by National Grid. So that's a National Grid asset that cannot be customer owned. In terms of the least cost to serve analysis, that really is a examination of the company side equipment, what it costs to procure and install. Obviously, with a service of this nature, there's a customer side component too. So it does end up involving certain work that's not National Grid owned, it's customer owned. So that would definitely be part of the discussion if the customer had a financial impact because of going secondary or primary meter. And that would be factored into which way that the service would go. But the main root of the analysis is based on the National Grid equipment.
Thank you. Next one is where can I find out the National Grid technical requirements for a zero export system, commercial 3-phase, less than 500 kW?
Yeah, thank you. So the even though a system may not be exporting, it still would be paralleled with our system, and it still can have an effect on load flow, protective device coordination, and things of that nature. So it does still fall under the same requirements as any other DG trying to interconnect in our system. So that would all fall under ESB 756, where you can find the requirements for all interconnections.
Thank you. The next one I will take, it says, is the entire interconnection application processed on a rolling basis, or are there deadlines or key dates to note with regards to the interconnection application process? So if I read this question correctly, right, around applications itself, right, that they're done on a rolling basis, right? As applications are submitted, they're taken in and reviewed by our screening team. And at that point, once the application is submitted, that starts the timelines, right? So there is a 3 business days to acknowledge, 10 business days to complete the review, and obviously there could be holds depending on the completeness of that application. But the timelines don't start prior to an application being submitted, and there are no application windows. Right, that you would need to wait a certain day, or certain applications are only allowed to come in once the application is submitted. Obviously there are different paths, different processes that the application could go down that would have corresponding time frames and payment expectations and payment time frames working through that process. But when it comes to applications, those applications come in and are reviewed on a rolling basis. Okay, JJ, the next one is for you. It does say on JJ's site and line diagram requirements, is that for projects of all sizes?
So the requirements differ depending on the size of the project. We have 4 different sets of requirements for the projects depending on the type of interconnection. So 250 kW projects and below will have one set. 250 to a half meg will have another set of requirements. 500 megawatts and above will have their own set of requirements, and then any CHP combined heat and power projects will have even more stringent requirements as far as what's required on the site plan line diagrams. And there's a checklist at the end of every pre-application that will separate and depict everything required for each necessary type of application.
Great, thank you. So I just want to do a time check, right? We anticipated being done at 11:30. I'm happy to try to get through a few more questions here over the next 5 minutes or so. Any questions we don't get to, we will take offline and try to get answers out to the broader group on that. So we'll take a few more questions. I see them, they keep coming in, the list keeps getting longer. So appreciate all the questions. We will continue to work through them, but we'll take the next 3 to 5 minutes and get through a couple more questions. One of the questions, the next question is just around whether this presentation will be sent out. So the presentation will be posted. We don't send it out to the attendee list, right? But we'll post it. We'll let you know where the link is, and then I think Jerry also put a link to the DOER website where this slide deck will be posted also. On the National Grid website, the slide deck will be posted. The recording will also be posted. And again, if there are questions that we don't end up getting to today, we'll do our best to post the question and answer piece of that for people to have access to. That may take a little bit longer than the turnaround to get the slides up, but we will continue to work through that piece of it. Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot for the next one. It says National Grid allows curtailment letters for derating the nameplate capacity of the inverter. Does National Grid allow similar letters for determining the AC capacity of the inverter when grid connected if the inverter is allowed to output higher capacity during grid outages?
Right. So the intent of a derating letter is to establish the maximum that the site can produce. So right now we look at it as a static derating, not a dynamic one, which I think is kind of suggested here. But again, we will, and we'll evaluate and consider whatever design is proposed by the developers within the particular case and application. But if there's something that can allow the site to output at a higher capacity, we need to have a comfort level that it's going to do that only when it's not grid connected. So it would have to be not a software-based approach, something that's more of somehow shows an open air gap, so that we would not have a possibility of having that increased export when connected to the grid. So it can get into the details on a particular project, but right now we would not be accepting a derating letter for something like this. It would have to be evaluated as part of the design.
Thank you. All right, I'll do my best to get a few more questions in here. So the next one is, how do I get questions answered, right? I email using the help in the contact us section, and they tell me to use the chat. I cannot use the chat unless the application has been finalized, right? So there is based on the status of that application, right? There would not be a job owner assigned, right? If you do have a submitted application, right, and a job owner assigned, I would always say reach out to that job owner if you have any issues or questions, right? And they can help move through it. In a project that does not, or an application that does not submitted yet, if you are not finding a way to get to somebody in the portal, there's always the distributed generation at nationalgrid.com mailbox. You can always send an email there. That email box is monitored on a daily basis, and those are forwarded off to the appropriate people to be able to respond and get answers, right? So if the portal connection is not working, please feel free to use that distributed generation mailbox for National Grid. The next one is, what type of changes can be made to a project once the interconnection application process is started? At what stages can these changes be made if allowed? So it's a sliding scale, right? It's hard, and there is no specific list of allowed changes, right? So the term itself in the tariff is significant. Right, so if a significant change is being made, depending on the status of the project, right, it could go down a different path. If significant changes are being made during the study stage, there may be a requirement for that project to be withdrawn, a new application, including those significant changes to be resubmitted and have the process start over. Post ISA, right? There are certain battery additions and those type of things, right? That are significant changes that have some guidance from some of the efforts we've had with DPU about moving those forward. But we would revisit significant changes, potentially the need for restudy, and again, depending on the significance of those changes, the need for the ISA to be withdrawn, the application to be withdrawn, and the process to be started over. So again, it is a sliding scale. Some areas are far more difficult, far more saturated than others. Different types of systems, right, will have different types of significant changes. So that is a discussion, right? That if you are looking to make a change, have that conversation with your job owner from CEI. We can engage the engineers, or set up meetings with the engineers to talk through potential changes. But we can look at those on a case-by-case basis. JJ, this one's for you. It says, does the electrical PE stamp for the SLD have to be registered in the same state as the project?
Yeah, so it's like licensing requirements. They change from state to state. So if I'm getting a Massachusetts application, I'd like to see that it is from somebody licensed in Massachusetts, or if it's from Rhode Island, New York, etc.
Thank you. Margaret, I'm going to give you this next one. Submitting a new simplified interconnection application. I noticed that it wouldn't let me upload any of the supporting documentation at that time. There was a note saying forms will take time to fully create. How long does it take for those forms to be available? And I haven't seen this before. Will this be standard moving forward? It was an inconvenience. I had to come back a few days later to complete the application.
Thanks, Will. So that is just a temporary delay in our portal. The forms, though, should populate within a moment or two, at most a minute or two. Usually if you just refresh once or twice, they show up. If there is a case where they don't, please reach out to us. And I know Will just went through all those options in a question a moment ago, especially on the simplified side, that we also do check the chatter for draft cases. So please, if they don't show up right away, please reach out to us. Don't feel the need to wait a couple days.
Great, thank you. So we just have a couple more. I'm going to try to get through both of them. So I apologize for the continued overage of the time, but we're getting close. Margaret, this one's for you too. It says, does solar plus storage AC capacity have a simplified cap that would push it into a complex review process?
Yes, so if the total system size of solar plus AC storage is over 15 kW for single phase or over 25 kW or three phase, it wouldn't qualify for the simple process. And most those that, it's a borderline of simple go into the expedited process if they're over that limit.
Thank you. And then the last one I have here, right, says what protective devices are needed? Sort of an open-ended question, but I don't know, JJ or Mike, if you guys have any thoughts. Again, what protective devices are needed?
So this question was brought up after Mike spoke about the non-export question a little earlier. So the protective devices that could be required for non-export, like Mike said, a visible open air break in the system to make sure that no generation is coming back onto the system, and also relaying to also monitor and prevent any kind of export back onto the system in a non-export application. I'm pretty sure that's where that question arrived from.
And just to add to that too, the connection of a non-export system to our grid could still cause coordination issues of protective devices that already exist on our system. So that's part of the need for the review and analysis and check of what the actual effects are.
Thank you. Okay, and then I got one more last one here. It just says, how many business days is the utility permitted to take a review, to review or provide feedback on developer submitted revisions during an impact study? So there's no specific time. I guess it does depend on the number of changes, right? And I think part of the whole process is that when questions are being asked or additional information is being asked for or updates are being given, the engineers are moving on to another project and starting to review that and moving forward. Right, that we aren't just waiting for the response to be able to pick it up immediately. So there is a period of time that once the response comes back in, that then has to be worked into the engineer's overall availability. That makes sense, right? And the idea is that we would turn that around as quickly as we're able to. There's no specific time frame. There's no time frame dictated in the tariff. There's no specific time frame internally. Right, but what we are trying to do is make sure that we are taking projects off hold as we're able, progressing them forward, but at the same time making sure that we are giving the right amount of due to the process, to the projects, and reviewing everything before we sign off and release the hold. So no specific dates or I'm sorry, time frames or number of business days. But again, it is something that we do expect to try to get done as quickly as we are able and resources allow. So again, apologize. We went about 15 minutes over, but we did make it through, I think, all the questions that were submitted. So I appreciate everybody hanging in there with us. Appreciate everybody jumping on. And with that, we will end the meeting. And over the next couple days, we will, again, get the slide deck and the recording posted. So thanks, everybody, and stay safe and healthy.